I have a pretty bad fear of heights. I've always had some slight fear, but as a kid, it was pretty irrational. I was never in a situation involving heights. Hell, the highest up I'd ever gone was on the playground climbing to go down the slide. The monkey bars, though, were out of the question. At least, my fear seemed pretty irrational. Until my family and I went to a local carnival one summer night back in the late 90s. I was about 11 at the time, and my family, which included myself, my older brother who was 14, my little sister who was 6, and my parents, went to the carnival that came near our town every year. I did love going, but I loved the games more than the rides. I remember the drive always took forever, according to my child's sense of time, but really, it was about a 45-minute drive. Anyways, I had a few of my favorite games and crafts that I liked to do, and there were a few rides that I would go on with my siblings as well. There weren't many my sister could go on yet, so one of my parents would always have to sit out to stay with her. But otherwise, one of our parents was always with us. In fact, I was always willing to go on the rides my sister wanted because those were more of the so-called kiddie rides. Ones that just slowly went in a circle or over slight bumps. Nothing that went too fast or up in the air or upside down. However, my brother was the opposite, and he loved the thrill of the roller coasters. He rode them all and would go multiple times if allowed. He always tried to get me to go on some of the rides with him so we didn't have to go alone and sit by a stranger. My mom wasn't huge on those rides either, and while my dad was, he was also a very tall guy, so some of the rides, he just couldn't get his knees in, so we couldn't go. Throughout this night, my brother, Cody, was constantly asking me to take different rides with him, but I was always saying no. But then he asked me to go on the Ferris wheel, a very large metal wheel that takes you straight up in the air, and there's nothing there to keep you in but the door. No thanks. But he begged, and talked about how it was the safest one. He said that all we had to do was sit in place and talk and we would be fine. He even took me over to the wheel and was pointing out how they hardly moved. They didn't swing or anything of the sort, and watching them, it did make me feel a bit better about it. So I gave in, and I decided it was time to try and face my fears and take on one of the simplest rides. So we walked up to the line, waited our turn as the operator slowly turned the wheels to fill the seats. There were bench seats on each end of the cars, which made sense to keep them balanced. And he allowed us to sit in the same cars and alone. So it was just going to be me and Cody in the one car. I contemplated where to sit, wanting to both sit by my brother, knowing I would feel safer, but also part of me thought it was best to sit on the other side and make it a little more balanced. I decided to go with the latter. I sat down and tightly gripped the lap bar as I waited for it to start moving. It slowly moved and stopped as the other cars filled, each jolt making me jump. Finally, it started moving smoothly around and I tried to enjoy it. Once we got halfway to the top, I could no longer look down as it scared me too much. I looked straight up and did my best to enjoy the view of the skyline and the setting sun. Trying to distract me, Cody teased me about it not being so bad and talked about how cool the view was from the top. I tried to let it pass and enjoy the moment, but once we got to the other side of the wheel, on the descent, there was a hard jerk in the seat, causing it to swing a little harder. I heard a few people in nearby cars scream, but then they laughed. It startled me. I thought something happened to the ride, and it was enough for me to tell Cody that I wanted off. We were kids, so I don't blame him now, but he pressured me to stay. He guilt-tripped me, saying that he would have to get off too, and he wasn't ready yet, so I felt bad. I decided to stick it out, telling myself that it's a one-time deal and that I would make it for another 5 minutes or so. We went back around again, and there was another jolt as we neared the top. Cody saw my concern, and he told me that they were just letting more people on, so it was going to be a moment. Once again, I couldn't look down. It seemed to take longer than normal for them to start moving again, and I could tell because Cody was becoming impatient. Then, with another jolt, we started moving again. When we got to the descent, there was another hard jolt, and that time the car had a horrible swing to it. My anxiety was rising and fast. I told myself that I would go around once more, and if they don't stop, I would ask them to. Something wasn't right, and it was more than just my fear talking now. We went around again, and once more there was a bad lurch when we reached the top. I assumed more people were getting on and waited, but once again it seemed to take a while. Finally, it started moving again, but as we neared the top there was a loud screech, and the car lurched hard. This time the screams that I heard below were not followed by laughter, and it immediately set me off. I asked Cody what had happened, and he leaned over the seat to check. He leaned over to check, and I pushed down on my lap bar in a nervous reflex, and that's when I heard the snap, and the bar no longer had any give. I looked down at the bar and saw that the bolt had come out. That lap bar was no longer holding me in place. One thing I have not mentioned yet is that the cars didn't have any doors. They were open. That lap bar was the only thing keeping me in my seat and in the car. Now I was panicking. Cody heard the snap and looked back into the car and was trying to keep me calm. He told me to scoot to the center and to not move. He didn't have to tell me twice. I closed my eyes and tried focusing on breathing as I listened to Cody mumble something about the ride. Then, the ride lurched forward several more times. It was like someone in a car was tapping the brakes repeatedly. The ride was no longer smooth and was just filled with jerking motions. We got across the top and back on the other side, about to make our descent. But then it stopped again, and with that jolt we heard a thud and more screaming. Cody scooted over to the side closest to the entrance and looked down. And by the look on his face, I could tell that something wasn't right. I asked him what was wrong, and he refused to say. I wanted to know what was going on, so I decided to look myself. I slowly moved towards the end. Unfortunately, it was the same side the bar broke, and looked over the side. To my horror, I saw a car close to the bottom, now sitting at an angle. The bars holding it up must have broken or come undone on one side, and the car was leaning. I could see an adult in the seat that was suspended in the air, and they were leaning over, clearly trying to hold themselves up. I immediately started to panic. Why did their car break? Where was the ride operator to help them out? I couldn't keep watching, so I went back to the center of the car, and I cried. Our car didn't move for the longest time. I could tell Cody was scared too, but I couldn't help but ask him why we hadn't moved. Why were they not getting us off this thing? It felt like we were there forever, suspended in the air and nothing but a broken lap bar keeping me in place. Cody would look down and let me know that they were letting people off that were close to the ground, but for us, we were still high in the air. I know I was a kid. I was a kid afraid of heights, but I thought that that was going to be my end. I was trapped in this car way up in the sky. There were no doors or anything keeping us there, and it seemed like it wasn't moving. How are they going to get us down? Somehow, even though I could tell he was just as scared, Cody did his best to try to keep us calm. He tried to distract me by playing a word game or I Spy, and it did help. He kept my mind occupied for the most part, but since it was late September, as the sun set entirely, it started getting colder and it was making it harder for me to focus. Finally, we heard someone on one of those megaphones speaking to us. They told us that help was on the way and to remain calm. It wasn't a fast process, but finally, we saw them trying to get the fire truck into the carnival grounds and a path to clear to us. I remember when they finally got to our car. The ladder nudged the car and it set me into a panic again, knowing it wasn't secured very well. They had me come closer to them and they grabbed me and handed me to the firemen further down the ladder. Then I climbed down the rest of the way. I was never happier to be in my parents' arms. Then we watched as they got Cody out. His lap bar was fully functional and wouldn't open while suspended, so they had to break it, and eventually have him wiggle out of the top. I remember the fear coursing through me again as I could see the top of his head. The thought of him having to almost stand in that car scared the hell out of me. But shortly after, he climbed down the ladder on his own as well and ran over to us. He was shaky, obviously just as scared, but we were okay. We had been stuck on that Ferris wheel for nearly 2 hours. It certainly felt a lot longer than that, but even those 2 hours were grueling. Turns out, the Ferris wheel was pretty old, and was probably not maintained like it should have been. Several bolts were messed up, and the jolts we felt were from it getting stuck. The operator was just turning it on and off again, trying to force it to go instead of getting everyone off. He continued the ride. Thus, what caused it to finally stop in its place and not move again. Several years later, after talking to Cody and my parents about it, Cody told me that he looked down and saw our parents below who looked terrified. And he saw a girl in a car closer to the ground that looked passed out in the car with a man holding her hand. At his age, he thought she had died, and seeing our parents so scared made him think that something terrible had happened, and that we may not get out of this. That is why he had gone silent. But yet he still tried to keep us calm, and I will never forget that. The girl was okay, though. She apparently was just scared and tried to get out, but in her panic, she passed out. Cody didn't understand that at the time and just saw an unconscious woman. All in all, we made it out semi-unscathed. It was a very terrifying moment for me, and I'm honestly still afraid of heights today. Probably even worse now. But I don't blame Cody for pressuring me on the ride. I've also not heard many stories about Ferris wheels breaking down, so it's at least a relief that what I experienced is very rare. But I think I would rather not chance it and just stay away from them. Hello, Raven. I wanted to start by saying that your podcast has quickly become one of my favorites. Back in July, I took an extended weekend road trip for my birthday, and I like to pass the time on the road listening to podcasts. On my drive back home that weekend, I ran out of new content to listen to on my usual cycle, and Spotify randomly played one of your shows. Since then, I've been listening every week and feel encouraged to share my story. Thank you. I've always had a belief in the strange and mysterious when it comes to the unexplained, and I'm open to the idea of the paranormal, cryptids, extraterrestrials, etc. I'm not a huge fanatic, but always had a fascination in these topics. With that being said, I don't have too many personal experiences with these topics. Any experiences I've had are relatively mild and nothing too freaky or wild. But nevertheless, here's my story. The story centers on the house I grew up in. There were a handful of unexplainable phenomena. I somewhat forgot about them, and it wasn't until I started writing that I realized these unexplained experiences shared some similarities. The first topic I will share are the noises my house made. When my family moved into the house, I was very young. I want to say I was around the age of 2 or 3. and my parents lived in that house until I was in my mid to late 20s. The house itself was not very old. We were the second or third owners of the house. Based upon this information and the architecture of the house, I want to say that it was built sometime in the late 1970s to early 1980s. Our house made many interesting noises. Living in this house most of my life, I grew accustomed to most of these noises and simply thought of them as typical noises a house would make. As I became accustomed to these noises, I forgot about them until one day in my early 20s, my girlfriend spent the night. The morning after that night, she said, "You know, your house makes a lot of weird, creepy noises, right?" To which I agreed. But my response was something along the lines of, "Yeah, I'm used to it." Also, side note, before I'm judged too hard, I lived in this house with my parents until after I graduated college. I commuted to school and saved thousands a year in living expenses. I don't regret it. Anyways, back to the story. Most of these noises had an explanation to them. I will share the most vivid noises I can remember, which centered on the noises that could be heard from my room. Every time the AC in the house would shut off after running, I could hear a metal tapping noise coming from the air vent in my room. What caused this noise, I'm not entirely sure. Perhaps it was condensation that collected in the AC vent and then began to drip as the temperature in the vent changed. But it wasn't anything odd or creepy. Another noise came from the window in the stairwell next to my bedroom. Our stairwell had a massive skylight leading from the main floor to the top floor. My bedroom was immediately at the top of the stairs, and so when my bedroom doors were open, I could hear noises coming from the skylight. The window in the skylight was similar to a big dome. The material did not look like typical glass, but appeared to be made out of a material similar to acrylic. Also, there were layers within it, with an inner layer and an outer layer. It almost reminded me of the materials used to make airplane windows. Anyways, this window would make a steady popping noise occasionally. My assumption is that it had something to do with the changing temperature of weather, combined with the heating and cooling of the setting sun, while also taking into account the temperature difference of the inside of my house versus the outside of the house causing these noises. Perhaps it was the rising and lowering of the temperatures causing an expansion and shrinkage of material that would cause these popping noises. The point I'm trying to convey is yes, there were a lot of weird noises, but most of these had a logical explanation behind them. However, there was one noise that I can remember that I could not find a logical explanation behind. This was a noise I did not notice until I was in high school. This noise could only be heard from a specific part of the house. When you enter the front door and walk towards the back of the house, you will find the kitchen and living room area. This noise could only be heard in that part of the house, and it sounded like it was coming from outside. It sounded like the thwack one hears when chopping wood, almost like the sound of someone chopping down a tree, but in a rhythmic thwack, 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 with each one being separated by 1 to 3 second intervals. This would go on for an hour or two. What was odd is that the noise could only be heard at night. We could not hear it every night, but heard it most nights. And when I first heard it, I did a little bit of investigation. I opened the windows to hear better. I tried looking out the back window into the neighbor's yard, but did not see anyone. The back of the house faced the back of our neighbor's house. Both our house and our neighbor's houses were built on the side of a hill. Picture houses built on adjacent hills, but the front entrances faced the front of each other's respectful hill, and then at the base of these hills was a creek that ran down the street. We each had about 30 yards of backyard between the back of our houses and this creek. There was plenty of room to do activities like chopping wood, but I didn't see anyone chopping wood. nor could I believe someone would chop wood for a few hours in the middle of the night. Again, I forgot about this noise until a few months later, when my mom noticed it as well. What's odd is this noise neither of us heard prior to this year. It wasn't one that our house made in the years prior, but we heard it for years after. We did some more investigation, stepping out the back door near the living room and walking along our back deck at night, peering into neighbors' yards. We also went out the back door in our basement that leads out beneath our deck, but we did not see anyone, but we could fairly hear the thwack, 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 thwack. But no luck in finding the source. We continued to hear this on occasion for years to come, but with no explanation. Now, the unexplained noises ended there. There are no other noises I can remember in which I could not find a logical explanation besides this thwacking sound. But there was one other unexplained phenomenon that took place in the basement of that house. Our basement was very nice. It was a finished walkout basement. For those who are unfamiliar with these terms, a finished basement means it has accommodations like walls, flooring, electrical, plumbing, etc. Our basement was more than a concrete or brick dungeon. It had carpet, multiple rooms, a little bar-like area, a bathroom with a toilet, and a shower. Also, the basement was a walkout basement, meaning there is a door that leads outside. As I said, our house was built into the side of the hills, so the top of the hill was level with the main floor, and the bottom of the hill was leveled with the basement. In the basement, one of the rooms had a small closet with a sump pump. This closet was about 4 feet wide and 7 feet long, and near the back of the closet was the sump pump. For those who don't know, a sump pump is a machine that pumps water out from underneath your house to a location further away, to prevent the basement from flooding. Because your basement is underground, when water collects underground from heavy rains, it can flood your basement. This device helps to prevent the water from pooling under your house. What was peculiar is that this door locked from the outside. Someone could not lock themselves inside this closet, but someone could get locked into the closet from the outside. If I wanted, I could hold someone captive by locking them in this closet. The room it was connected to was repurposed several times while I lived there. It was a kid's toy room, then my mom's office, and finally a living space. When it was a living space, sometimes my dad would sleep in this room on days where he needed to wake up early hours before my mom. Sometimes I would sleep down there because it was very cool in that room year-round. Now, as a kid, I remember playing in this room. I would lock the closet door every day because the sound of the sump pump would scare me. Allow me to say that again. I would lock that door every day, meaning someone or something would unlock it every day. At times, this would scare me and freak me out. That's why this room became my mom's office, because I would refuse to keep my toys in there and play in there. As the years passed, I forgot about this, until I came to sleep in this room as a way to find a cool place to sleep during hot summers. Again, I would lock this door, only to find that someone or something had unlocked it. Now, when I was older and locked it, it would not be unlocked the exact following day, but perhaps 16 to 72 hours later. It would then be unlocked. All this time, both as a child and in my late teens/early 20s, when I found the door unlocked, I would ask my parents or sister if they went into this room, but they would deny this, meaning no one in my family had unlocked the door. The lock was a privacy doorknob lock, featuring a thumb-turn locking mechanism, meaning the locking mechanism was in the door handle itself. There was a little latch on the doorknob one would twist to lock it. To lock and unlock the door, you would need to twist the thumb, turn 90 degrees. Now, how do these two unexplainable phenomena connect? Remember how I said behind our house was a deck? Well, near the southeast corner of our house, about 10 feet from the foundation, was a massive tree stump. What's odd is that our deck was built over the top of it. Whoever built the deck decided not to remove the stump, but instead build over the top of it. It stood about 2.5 feet high, with a circumference of about 6 feet, slowly rotting from the inside out. Just on the other side of the wall from that tree stump was the room with the door that never stayed locked. I have no clue when this tree was chopped down. It could have been well before the house was built, or just about the time the house went up. I do not know how it was chopped down, perhaps by a chainsaw or perhaps by hand. Why was the stump left, and the deck being built over it? I don't know. This might be a stretch, but perhaps someone or something is destined to chop down that ghost tree, creating the thwack, thwack, thwack we hear on certain nights. Then, when done chopping down the tree, this spirit, for lack of a better term, would head inside to the nearest corner of the house, unlocking that closet door in the process. Or, as you can see, I sometimes have an active imagination. Perhaps these are all strange coincidences with nothing in common. Perhaps the thwack noise can be easily explained and the door unlocking is the result of metal heating and cooling in that basement, but who knows? Now, at some point, this tree stump was finally removed by my parents. I just can't remember when. About 3 to 8 years before my family sold the house, they had some termite damage, and as preventative maintenance to help resolve the termite problem, this rotting tree stump was finally chopped up and hauled out. At this point, I was no longer living in the house, so I'm unsure if this solved the unexplained noise, and the closet door that never seemed to remain locked. Besides these two weird items, nothing out of the ordinary seemed to take place in my mind. At least, nothing malevolent in nature. If I remember anything else weird happening in that house, I will write back, but as I said in the beginning, living there so long, I just became used to the weird stuff, and found somewhat logical explanations to these happenings. To finish, I just wanted to say thank you for your time, and Raven, keep doing what you do. I really enjoy it, and I enjoy hearing the stories from listeners like me. Hi, Raven. I'm a big fan of your channel. I've been watching your videos for about half a year now, so whenever I need to distress or relax, I turn on your videos. I find your content calming and creepy and yet interesting, which has finally inspired me to share a few of my stories to get them off my chest. My earliest memory takes me back to my childhood home in the Midwest, where I'm originally from. I was around 6 years old back in the year of 2006, I believe. Growing up from a very small age, I always had constant nightmares which traumatized me to the core, but it became normal for me soon after. However, this one night was interesting. After I woke up from a nightmare that I had routinely, I distinctively remember immediately looking straight at a Mickey Mouse picture hanging over the dresser, which was my favorite picture, by the way. It was a picture of Mickey and Minnie Mouse sitting in front of the fire drinking hot chocolate at night in their living room. All of a sudden, the picture just dropped out of nowhere, falling behind the dresser and breaking, which had left me confused. The nails in the wall were perfectly strong and aligned, so I don't understand why it would fall. After all, that picture has been hanging there for quite a few years, with nobody ever touching it. I also had shared a room with my twin sister then, so the funny thing was that years later after that incident happened, I told my sister about it, and she remembers waking up at the exact same time as me, and experiencing watching the picture fall and break as well. This may not be anything, However, sometimes at night, after our mom would pick out our clothes for school, she would turn off the closet light, shut the closet door, and leave the room, only to find myself waking up in the middle of the night to the closet light being on again. And this would scare me. I would ask my mom if she turned it on, but she would always reply with a no. A year later, so in 2007, I believe, another creepy incident had happened. My sister and I were sleeping at our grandparents' house, which was built by my great-grandfather by hand. It's so full of history and rich memories, so that house still means a lot to me. Even though my grandparents don't live there anymore, they downsized to a smaller house. Anyways, me being the scaredy cat that I was, I always felt comfortable sleeping across the room from my grandparents upstairs, instead of sleeping downstairs in our girls' room, the room that our grandfather had made for my sister and I. That one night, when my sister and I were sleeping, I remember waking up laying on my back and not being able to move. I was too scared to get up and use the bathroom as well, so I just laid there. However, the room looked a bit off, and when I slightly turned my head and eyes to the left of me, I kid you not, I saw a long arm with a hand slowly raising above my head and then covering my eyes swiftly. I felt the dryness of the hand too before I passed out. Then in the morning, I woke up and it was back to normal. I haven't talked about it ever since then, until the year 2021. I mentioned it to my mom randomly one day, and she mentioned that the same thing had happened to her when she was a little girl, in that very same house, in that very same room. So that really makes me think that there's more about the house and its history. I really don't know what else to say about this, as it could mean anything. Although I do have a few more incidents that happened to me when I was a child, I won't mention them all here for the sake of time. But the last one that I would like to share with you was when I moved to the south. I believe it was the year 2013. It was a hot day. I was in the car with my mom and a family friend of ours. I loved and still love to go and visit different grave sites/cemeteries. As I go there to pay respects to those who have passed on, I once even had visited part of the gravesite where some slaves were buried at, which was very emotional. However, back to the story. My mom, our friend, and I were driving in a small neighborhood and came across this small cemetery that was in the center of the neighborhood. I wanted to check it out, and so we did. After about 15 minutes of looking around and reading some of the names of who had passed, I saw a small tombstone which was of a little child. Very young. Died within a couple of years. It made me sad, but I eventually moved on and walked back to the car as I couldn't stand the heat. The windows were all rolled down too, and as soon as we all were seated inside the car and strapped up, my mother was turning on the car as I heard a small, high voice to the right of the car saying, "Thank you." I turned to my right and looked around to see if any neighbors had come out. Nobody was there. I turned to the left and then behind me. Nobody was there. I then turned to the gravesite, in which I heard the voice coming from, and then turned to my mom and our friend. To my surprise and relief, my mom said, "Did you hear that?" She turned to our friend and then she replied with a, "Yeah, I heard it too." Both confused, they looked around to find the source, but to no avail. I then mentioned to my mother, saying, "I heard it too, but it came from that way," as I was pointing to the graveyard. This has left us all confused and speechless, as we couldn't find anyone outside to support the claim. So, my mom gave up and began to drive away. As I was looking at the site, giving it one last glance, I looked up, smiled, and quietly said, "You're welcome." This may sound weird. Even though I'm not sure what to believe in, I believe it was one of the little children I had paid my respects to, saying those words to us in appreciation. This one incident that gave me a little warmth and comfort in the end. Additionally, something I want to add is that the gravesite that I just mentioned probably doesn't get many visitors, as the maintenance of it was somewhat unkempt, and it looked run down. Sooner or later, I hope I could find a conclusion and source as to why these events happened. I think of it every now and then, as it does hold some meaning to me as well. I do apologize if my experiences weren't as exciting, but it means a lot to know that I'm not the only one who experiences unexplainable events in their lives. Recently, I haven't experienced anything, but if I were to, this channel would be the first to know. One of my favorite things to do as a kid was go to the Carnival or the local festivals in our area. The only thing I didn't like about them was when we had to leave. I loved the rides, the games, even if I rarely won. I loved the mazes and the fun houses they had. All of it. I have a lot of great memories from them, but this one that I'd like to tell you about, it was one of my less favorable memories. I believe I was around 8 or 9 at the time. I felt that I was very independent for my age, even if my parents didn't allow it. They wouldn't let me just wander off, but that didn't mean that I never tried. I wasn't an only child, so I would often try to get their permission for a certain ride or game, and then just run off to wait in line. So, the trip this year was no different to me. I would ask for money for what I wanted to do and take off. My parents following close behind me, and telling me to come back and wait with them. Every year I would try my hand at the bottle game. I would fail because it's not like I was very strong, but I still enjoyed it. It was like a goal for me every year to try and beat that game and win one of those giant stuffed animals. We'd probably been there for a good hour or so when we found ourselves in the Halloween part of the grounds. They had some games, a few spooky rides, as well as a children's haunted house. I didn't scare easily, so I wanted to check it out too. Once again, I ran to the line to wait, and my mother slowly caught up with me. It was just going to be the two of us going in, and we got in immediately, and it was pitch dark in there. They had some eerie background music playing, and from ahead, I could hear people screaming. One part had these flaps you had to walk through that was also a corn maze. It was hard enough with it being dark, but the flaps kind of made you disoriented, and you could easily get turned around, which is what seemed to happen. I was walking alongside my mother until I hit a dead end and backed into her. She then grabbed my hand and we continued on walking through the maze. Once through, I let go of her hand again and continued towards the exit, where she once again grabbed my hand. I obliged, as we were leaving the haunted house anyways. But as we exited, I looked up and realized that the hand I was holding was not my mom's, but was actually a different woman's. I let go and she laughed, saying that my mom had asked her to keep an eye on me. I'm sure I had a skeptical look on my face, but she knelt down and assured me that she was a very good friend with Rhonda, my mom's name. To me, the fact that she knew my mom's name immediately assured me that this was legit. There was no way that it could have been a lie knowing that. I asked her for her name, and she said it was Charlotte and that she used to go to school with my mom. Again, everything seemed to check out in my little mind, so I went with it. I asked where she was now, and Charlotte said that she may still be in the house, but that we could catch up with her after we were finished. Then, she asked me if I wanted to play some more games. It was seeming like I was going to have exclusivity to Charlotte, and that I would get to play all the games I wanted to without the delays. That was something that I was very quickly on board for. She grabbed my hand and we walked off to our next destination. She actually let me play a lot of games, but some of the rides she wouldn't let me go on. After we explored for a while, she then asked me if I wanted something to eat, and we headed to all the various food booths. We always had dinner before we went to the carnival, so I wasn't very hungry, but I didn't dare say no to the funnel cake that she offered. As we sat and ate, she pulled out her phone and said that it was my mom calling. She started talking and told her about all we had done so far, and then it appeared that she was asked a question. She looked at me and asked, "Your mom wants to know if you just want to stay with me for the night, and she can come pick you up in the morning?" I remember asking if I can, and she laughed, saying yes, and then told my mom that she would be seeing us tomorrow. After she was off the phone, she explained how she had a daughter just like me, but that she was much older now. She said she still had her room set up with all of the toys and kids' clothes though, so I was welcome to stay in her room. I was so excited at this point. I got to play games, go on rides, and have desserts all night. Then I was going to be able to stay at Charlotte's and have even more fun. We tossed our trash and she asked if I was ready to go. I was able to do a lot of what I wanted, and being more than satisfied, I agreed. She gently grabbed my hand like she had been, and we started walking towards the back of the carnival. There was a parking lot in the back too, but my family had parked in the front. As we got closer to the exits, I saw a man sitting on a nearby bench, hunched over and looking at his hands. He must have heard us approaching because he looked up at us, and he looked angry. As soon as he made eye contact, Charlotte let go of my hand. We got close to the exits, and she started rifling around with her purse. The man got up and walked over to us, said something to Charlotte about taking too long. At that point, she no longer appeared to be the same woman. Her voice dropped and wasn't the higher-pitched, sweet voice that she used with me. It was sharp and deep. She said something like, "Back off" to him, and I watched as she pulled out cigarettes and lit one, with her hands now shaking. This guy put his hand on my shoulder to push me forward, but I didn't budge, now becoming a bit scared. I asked who the guy was, and he said, "None of your business, let's go." I did my best to stand in place when Charlotte approached me and tried to grab my hand and pull me along too. She wasn't the soft and kind woman that first approached me, and it confused and scared me. She said that we needed to go, and I just thought back to those lessons we learned in school about strangers and how you should have a password with the loud people. The problem with this was that my family never used the password or code method. I thought it sounded really cool, but we never did it, or seemed interested in it. So I did the next best thing that I could think of. Charlotte had been calling me Katie, which was my nickname that only friends and family used. So I asked her what my name was. She tried to blow it off by saying, "We don't have time for this, Katie, it's getting late." But I kept yelling at her to tell me my name. The man started to say something, but she told him to go get in the car. As he walked away, she knelt down and said that she was sorry, but she was just tired, and said matter-of-factly that my name was Catherine. But it was the wrong answer. My name was actually Katrina, and a lot of people assume it's Catherine based on my nickname. I knew at this point that this person was lying. I started screaming that I wanted to go back, and she kept arguing that I already agreed to go with her, like it was some kind of binding contract. She grabbed my arm and started pulling me as a car pulled up beside her. I managed to step on her foot. She was wearing open-toed sandals, and she screamed at me. She let go of my arm, and I backed up, ready to run, but I stopped. To this day, I don't know why I stopped. Part of me was scared that I just hurt an adult and that I was going to be in trouble, but I knew I needed to get away from her. I started walking backwards, back towards the carnival, when I saw a couple entering with 2 kids. It was like they knew the minute that we made eye contact. The woman approached me and I immediately grabbed her hand and started crying. I could tell that she was taken aback, but then she asked me if I was okay. I looked back at the woman called Charlotte, and she was already getting in the car. The woman stood by me as we watched them take off, tires squealing on the way out. The woman asked me if I knew who that person was, and I said that I didn't know. I thought she was my mom's friend, but I couldn't remember ever meeting her before. She asked me if my parents were here, and I told her that I thought so, or that I hoped they hadn't left without me. I was still young. I feared that maybe Charlotte was just telling the truth and she was a friend, but maybe she was just mean. Luckily, the woman asked to pick me up, and for some reason I accepted. She at least seemed more trusting than Charlotte, and I guess since she was here with another kid, it felt right. As we walked in, she assured me that she would help me find my parents, and she told her husband that she would meet up with them afterwards. She took me to the booth where you could buy game and ride tickets in advance, instead of at each one, and she told them that she found a lost kid and that they needed to call the police. She then bought me a bottle of water and we waited on a nearby bench. She talked to me like Charlotte did, which sometimes upset me, thinking I was just going to go through it all a second time, but at the same time she seemed different. She talked about her son, too. Said that he was close to my age. As we talked, a few people approached us and asked questions about my parents. And then finally, after some time, I heard someone yell my name. I looked over and saw my parents approaching with my two siblings. I ran over to my mom and I didn't want to let her go. She held on to me but scolded me at the same time for running off after the haunted house. I had to explain to her how someone grabbed my hand in there and how I thought it was her. Then I explained Charlotte to her and she confirmed that she didn't know anyone named Charlotte. They talked to the woman that stayed with me and thanked her, and then we had to give the police a statement since it was an attempted kidnapping. By the time it was all said and done, the woman had left, and my siblings and I were falling asleep on the bench while the adults finished up. The next morning, my parents had an even longer talk with me about strangers, and finally we agreed on a password. This way, if it ever happened again, I could use it and I would know. Thankfully, I never had to use it. But I learned a very, very valuable lesson. Charlotte, or whoever she was, did a great job at making it all seem real. She even made sure she knew my nickname so she could talk to me. So, if something seems off, no matter your age or how much someone's story checks out, go with your gut. It's trying to tell you something for a reason. So, of the many things in my life that I will do, claim to be a saint is not one of them. Between the ages of 6 and 23, I lived in rural Nebraska. It was the kind of place where the most interesting thing that happened was the neighbor getting a new truck, or the looming threat of a possible tornado coming through the area. There was no in-between, 0 to 60 at a moment's notice, so to speak. During those downtimes, boredom was ever present, and a good portion of teenagers would fall back on anything from video games and whatever cheesy movie cable TV had on at the time, to once in a while crank calls and occasional light shoplifting. Contrary to popular belief, not everybody in these areas tends to the fields. My dad was a long-haul trucker, and my mom was a substitute teacher. This usually meant my mom was hard at work the night before having to teach a class, trying to get the curriculum for the day down, and my dad was usually gone for 2 to 4 days at a time on average. I wouldn't go as far as to say I was a troublemaker, but I wasn't a good kid. As mentioned before, light shoplifting was a thing, and my 5-finger freebies of choice were usually bottles of Steel Reserve or MD 2020. Mad Dog for those of you not in the know. At the time, I was friends with this kid that we all knew as Wally. He was a tag-along, for lack of a better term, and usually went along with anything suggested to him due to a desperate need to fit in. Honestly, I wasn't one of those guys that pressured him into doing too many stupid things, but he usually went with me on those shoplifting excursions in order to provide a distraction, and I usually grabbed enough for the two of us. One night, I want to say late April of 1999, it was going like any other. There was Squad on TV, Mom was prepping for an algebra class she had to teach the following morning, and Dad was off hauling produce to some town in New Jersey. I had just gotten my driver's license at the time, and so I got in my beater of a Ford Taurus and picked up Wally so we could do what we usually did. Get absolutely plastered in this abandoned farmhouse where a good portion of teenagers would hang out and do whatever. It was kind of like an unofficial party spot, and the fact that it hadn't been leveled by a tornado, considering it was in an open field with little to no coverage, was astounding. But there it stood, and there we partied. Thinking back on it, the fact that my parents, or even the shopkeepers in the area, never caught on to what was happening right under their own noses is a little bit more concerning these days. Hindsight is 20/20 after all, and I now know had my parents realized to what degree I was screwing up, well, I'm pretty sure I would have needed a pillow grafted to my hindquarters in order to sit. But I digress. Wally and I hit up the one convenience store in the area, where we knew that the shopkeeper was so cheap that he only had one security camera, and it was facing towards the register. Wally was a year older than me, so 18 at the time, and he distracted the shopkeeper by attempting to buy a pack of Black & Milds, and acting as if they carried a specific flavor that we knew for a fact never existed. So, as this 20-something employee is looking for kiwi strawberry Black & Milds, I do my thing and pocket 2 bottles of blue raspberry flavored Mad Dog 2020. I clear my throat as I grab a Zagnut bar off the candy rack. Wally says, "Never mind, I'll just take the vanilla flavored," and makes his purchase before going back out to the car in order to wait for me. I buy the candy bar and tell the shopkeep to have a nice night while playing it cool. The whole time, they're none the wiser. It was a system that worked, and had worked, since I started drinking 2 years prior. Like a charm, every single time. So he and I get out to this farmhouse, and we're having a great time. All the while, we're demolishing those 2 bottles of cheap booze, and a few people brought some other refreshments, most of which had varying degrees of legality, and though we stayed away from anything medicinal, we didn't turn down the occasional bottle or can of beer that was offered to us. I start having a drunken conversation about punk rock with a friend of mine from music class, and Wally disappears for a while with this girl he had a crush on. He comes back about an hour and some change later with an ear-to-ear grin on his face, bragging to me about how he disproved a little theory about how alcohol affects performance. He tells me the girl's name, and I realize that she has a boyfriend. Before I go any further into the story, let me preface the remainder of the tale by telling you, according to Wally, she told him that the 2 of them were on break, and the boyfriend never actually comes into play. What happens is far worse. The farmhouse was almost a good half an hour away from where I lived, and after we sobered up a bit, we realized it was getting late, and we started to head home. I'd say we were about 15 to 20 minutes away from Wally's house, which was right at the end of the street from me, when he tells me he feels like his bladder is going to burst. Realizing that there's not really anywhere to stop for us because we hit this point where it's really nothing but a couple of dairy farms and sprawling fields, I tell him I'm going to pull over to the side of the road so he can take a leak. But he needs to be as covert about it as possible. The last thing we need was for somebody to drive by and see him in public, only to report him to the cops, resulting in us being busted for underage drinking, because the smell of liquor on our breath was quite palpable. So I'm sitting behind the wheel of my car, keeping watch so I can honk the horn just in case anything suspect happens. And in a moment that still causes me nightmares, it happens. I still remember him wearing that San Francisco 49ers starter jacket and khaki cargo pants. He's standing there wiggling his hips and doing his business, and nothing weird is happening. But suddenly, I see him go rigid for a couple of seconds, and he just collapses to the ground. At first, I thought he was just screwing with me. I honked the horn a couple of times and screamed out, "Real funny, man. Come on, let's get going." No response. He didn't move an inch. I started freaking out and immediately started sobering up. Remembering I had a flashlight in my glove box, I grabbed it in order to have a better look at what was going on. I walk up to Wally and I'm immediately hit with the smell of burning hair. I look down at my friend with the flashlight on him and I can see that he's pale as a ghost. I get down on my knees and I start slapping him in the face. 5 or 6 slaps in, he starts coming to, but he's not with it. I don't think whatever had just happened completely registered at the time, but as I'm trying to make sense of it, I hear this low buzz. I shine my flashlight over to the direction of it, and that's when I see it. In the spot where Wally was relieving himself, I saw liquid dripping off of a wire between a couple of fence posts. I really had to take a look to see it because that spot was also overgrown with weeds. Wally had urinated on a semi-concealed electric fence. Now, the thing that didn't make sense is that both of us had been dared to take a whiz on an electric fence before, and it's pretty common knowledge that they don't really have enough output to do any real damage. Sure, you might get shocked and it might hurt, but you're not putting your life in your hands despite popular belief. So this didn't make sense to me. Something else was present, and it caused my friend to lose consciousness long enough for me to have to literally slap him awake. And now, here I am attempting to help him pull up his pants so I can get him in the car. And all I smell is burnt hair. I'm not ashamed to say, I shined the flashlight on his groin, and I immediately knew that I had to get him to the hospital. He's got, at the very least, second-degree burns on his inner thighs. And, well, do I really have to tell you where else? By now, I'm as sober as a judge, and I'm heading towards the county general. By the grace of God, it wasn't too far away from us. I was cooking up a story in my head in order to tell the doctors literally anything other than my friend was taking a drunk piss on an electric fence. But I couldn't think of anything. I knew we were in deep water once our parents found out, but that was the least of my concerns. Wally starts fading in and out of consciousness, and in the moments where he's lucid, he's crying his eyes out. The pain is starting to hit him, and I don't know what to do. In my mind, I'm doing the right thing by heading to the hospital, and I'm counting the seconds until we arrive. In what seemed like an eternity, we finally pull into the parking lot. I speed up to the emergency room entrance and run inside screaming for a nurse and a wheelchair. I explain that my friend has been electrocuted, and before I knew it, one of the attending physicians and a nurse take off like a shot towards my car with the wheelchair in hand. They get him to the back, and I explain the situation. Even the doctor looked perplexed when I mentioned that I suspected an electric fence did this. But lo and behold, once they got him to the back, a few of my suspicions were confirmed. He was pretty badly burned on his inner thighs. Everything else connected had its fair share of burns, but was nowhere near as bad, thankfully for him. The doctor asked me my age, and when I told him I was 17, he told me that I would have to either get my parents or Wally's down to the emergency room. I made what was possibly the hardest phone call of my teenage life. Wally's mom answered, and I told her she needed to get down to the ER because her son had an accident. She started freaking out, as you would expect. What parent wants to hear that? She told me to stay put and to call my parents and tell them what was going on. And that's exactly what I did. Wally had to be hospitalized for over a week. The doctors needed to make sure the burns didn't get infected, and they also wanted to monitor his vitals. This is when Wally's mom would tell me that he had a heart arrhythmia. I never knew about this. That would explain him passing out and all, but it didn't explain the burns. His mom finally asked me if I could narrow down where we were when all of this happened. And despite my semi-sober state at the time, I was able to recollect almost exactly where we were due to the tacky mailbox that stood out right by the field. I came home after school one day, and my mom was hanging up the phone. And she told me to sit down, and I honestly expected the worst possible news. Thankfully, she wasn't about to tell me that my friend had passed away. But she was about to tell me something that helped the entire situation make far more sense. When Wally was relieving himself, he did in fact pee on that fence. What neither of us realized, though, was that there was a bit of exposed underground cable in those weeds. The wiring had been chewed away by mice or whatever was living in the field at the time, and the owner has complained to the electric company about occasional brownouts on his property. Wally's mom and dad would attempt to pursue legal action against the electric company due to poor maintenance, but nothing came of it. As far as the company and the courts were concerned, this was a freak thing, and they had no way of knowing about it, despite the neighbors' protests. Life went on as usual, and Wally took his time healing. Eventually, he came clean to his parents about everything. Well, almost. He told them that the alcohol came into play at the party and that I was his designated driver. Despite the fact that he was legally an adult, he still lived under their roof, and they forbade him from ever going out to that farmhouse and partying the way he did that night, ever again. And speaking of that party, and that night, the girl that ended up hooking up with him that night showed up at his parents' house looking for him about 3 months later. She let him know that she was pregnant. She had broken up with her boyfriend for good shortly after that night, and he had no idea. You want to talk about walking on eggshells? Wally decided to be there for her entire pregnancy, under the condition that a DNA test was done once the baby was born. Even though he was looking at serious life changes, he was relieved to find out that the little girl in his arms was in fact his daughter. Fatherhood changed him for the better. He ended up going to a trade school and getting a fairly good job doing farm equipment repair. It was enough to pay his bills and cover his child support. Though the mother of the daughter didn't want him to bear that burden, the state had other ideas. But I was proud to learn that not only had he stepped up to the plate, that little girl was his entire life. Gone were the days of partying, trying to seek out friendship wherever he could get it. His little Olivia had him wrapped around her finger. For a while, I couldn't say the same thing about myself. He and I fell out of touch after I moved out of the area, but my habits followed. I became a barely functioning alcoholic well into my late 20s. Had it not been for a couple of DUIs, a health scare, and a suspended license, I don't think I would have gotten my act together. But after we had a new arrival at my AA meeting, share his story about how he'd become paralyzed from the waist down after a car accident where alcohol was involved, it was the overall catalyst for me to start getting my crap together. Not too long ago, I actually celebrated 20 years sober. I haven't looked back since. Wally and I reconnected through social media 5 years back, and it was almost as if the friendship never took a pause. He has 3 children now, and the little girl that helped him get his life together is now an adult working as a cosmetologist in Aberdeen, Washington. Wally and his wife settled down not too far away from that location, and after a long-awaited reunion where I went out and visited them last year, I can honestly say that Lydia is a wonderful woman. I try not to think about that night too much, but As I stated earlier, it does sneak up on me from time to time, whether it be in the form of a nightmare or any time I hear electrical buzzing. I could throw a cop-out your way and say that that night is what drove me to drink, but I'd be lying. I was well on my way to being a barely functional drunk long before then. I'm just glad things worked out for the better. Well, better than they could have. I don't want to think about how badly things could have gone that night, along that desolate stretch of Nebraska road. Hello, I'm newer to your channel, but I had something happen to me over the summer that I wanted to share, because while it was terrifying for me, I have no idea what caused it, or why it happened in the first place. I had gone to a friend's house for a birthday party that was a little over an hour away from my home. I'm only 22, but I've never been much of a drinker, so the plan was to be there for a few hours, and then drive myself back home. I got to the party around 4 p.m. and we all had a blast. We regrettably started a game of Monopoly that took a lot longer than I think most of us expected. I also wasn't willing to give up my spot, as I was winning. Yes, I'm competitive. Anyways, our game went on so long that we ended up ordering pizza, and I didn't leave until nearly 11 p.m. I could feel the day catching up with me, but I wasn't at the point that I was worried about falling asleep behind the wheel. However, my friend did offer to let me stay there for the night, but since I had to work the next day, I needed to get home. So I said my farewells and headed out, hoping the breeze and some music would help to keep me awake. As I mentioned, it was late, so the highway was pretty empty. I had a good drive ahead of me and I was ready to get home, so I may have been going a little faster than I should have. I'm not talking crazy, but probably around 10 over. Like I said, there weren't many cars on the road as is, and I stayed to the right, so I just focused on getting home. It was a normal drive in the beginning, up until the white convertible came flying up behind me. And when I say that, I'm not exaggerating. I can admit that I was going a little over the speed limit, but I saw the car's headlights weave out from behind another car, get back over, and then catch up to me. At first, I feared it was a cop that may have clocked me, so I started slowing down. But then I noticed they didn't have their lights on, so maybe it wasn't a cop. One thing that was consistent was that they still weren't slowing down. It was one of those moments when you see a car in front of or behind you that's going way too fast, and you brace yourself expecting an impact. And that's what I did. This guy was still barreling towards me, and I knew I was going to get hit. But to my surprise, instead of hitting me or even swerving to the left lane, they slowed down and stayed behind me. And now they were behind me. I could tell that it wasn't a cop either. That's when I noticed that it was a convertible. So my thought changed to it was just some jerk driving all over the road. He was only proving my theory when he started riding my bumper. I wanted to brake check him because I wasn't liking how he was driving, but instead, I put it in cruise control to go 1 over the speed limit and waited, hoping he would soon pass me. Instead, he stayed behind me for several miles, getting really close and then backing up. I kept eyeing him, as if I could figure out what their problem was through the mirror, but then they started honking and even flashing their brights at me. Seriously, I had no idea what this guy's problem was. Why not just go around? I finally got sick of the guy and tapped my brakes, but that seemed to do something to him. He backed off, and then out of nowhere he actually hit my bumper. It wasn't enough to knock me off the road or anything, but I could feel the slight lurch from it. Now I was mad because I doubt he was going to stop to record any damage. But here I was in the middle of the highway, almost midnight, with some maniac hitting me. I honestly didn't know what to do, so I just slowed down even more, hoping that going under the speed limit would entice him to move on. I get it. You win. Just leave me alone. Finally, I started to get a small sense of relief when he swerved over to the left lane. I thought he was finally going to move on. I just hoped that any damage he did was minimal and that maybe I could catch his plate when he passed me. But I should have known it wasn't going to be that simple. He got over and was now right beside me. I was nervous, but I wanted to make eye contact with this person. Who was this crazy jerk? I looked over and the guy had turned on the interior light. He was wearing a red shirt and cap, but the part that stood out to me was the gun in his right hand, pointing directly at me. I didn't think, I just reacted. I ducked down, slammed my brakes, and swerved over to the shoulder. The convertible kept going, and when I looked up after a few seconds, he was long gone. I was shaking, terrified that I could have been shot, or even maybe he could come back or be waiting for me up the road. And the worst part, I had a very vague description and no license plate number. I stayed where I was and I called the cops. That way I could at least report that he hit me. It was a hit and run at this point, even if they couldn't prove or do anything about the gun. I did look at my bumper. I have a deep blue Ford, and while the dent wasn't very prominent, there were some white paint scuff marks. The cops arrived and I explained everything to them, and they seemed skeptical at first. I say that because they kept asking me if I was sure that I didn't know the person. Did I piss someone off on the road earlier or cut them off? Even asking if I was racing them. I was driving an old Festiva. I'm not racing anyone in that thing. They got my information, took pictures of my car, and that was it. I took pictures too so I could give them to my insurance and see if there was anything they could do. I won't sit here and lie. I was terrified to drive home. I was worried he was legitimately going to be parked somewhere and waiting for me. However, I did get home with no more incidents. I ended up taking a road parallel to the highway, not wanting to give that guy a chance. To this day, I still have no idea what his problem was. From what I could make out, he did not look familiar. I still can't think of anyone that would have known where I was at that exact moment that could have been messing with me, nor could I think of anyone that was pissed off at me to follow and threaten me with a gun. So, was he just mad and wanted to ruin someone else's night? Was he playing a really bad prank and wanted to scare someone? I still have no idea. I'm just as clueless today as I was a few months ago. It terrifies me to think that he may still be out there doing that to other people. And the thought that he had a gun, that he could just use it at any time to an innocent person on the road, makes it just as terrifying now as it did that night. I've been working in retail and grocery stores for quite some time. At the time of this story, I was working in the produce and deli department at a pretty popular grocery store based in the Midwest. The job was fine, and I really didn't get much interaction with customers outside the normal, hey, good morning type thing. It was typically in passing, or while I was stalking something that they may have been browsing too. I also preferred working the mornings because it was less chaotic. But there was one day I worked where I had the most interaction I have ever had with a customer. And the best part is that, at only 4 feet or so, they creeped me out the most. It was pretty early in the morning, and I had been stalking and checking the produce. Depending on the day, we may check them throughout and add more where needed, but the main refill and checks I did in the morning. It was a Wednesday because we had just got our truck the day prior, so we had a lot of fresh stuff, including our fruits. I had filled out the apple display in their neat pyramid-like display and had moved over to the bananas. If you've ever worked in any type of grocery store, you know the bananas go fast, so I overstock those. After finishing both of those, I took my 15-minute break, and that's where it all began as I headed back with my cart. There in the front, by my well-organized apples, now stood a young girl who couldn't have been more than 9 or 10, holding 2 of the apples. She was wearing what looked like a school uniform. She had a dark blue collared shirt on and a matching blue plaid skirt. I thought that it was odd because, based on the time, school would have already been in session, so she would have been late. But I thought maybe she had an appointment or something. Maybe her parents had to stop here first and then she would be going to school. I thought nothing of it after that, and I went back to my work. I started organizing and stalking, but I heard someone sighing and mumbling. I looked back a few times and saw that it was coming from the same little girl, who now had an arm full of apples. I thought it was odd, but I wasn't going to get into it with a kid, so I just let it go, and thought to myself that I would fix it after she was gone. I went back to what I was working on when I reminded myself of the kid and turned to look again. This time, she'd been working on 2 separate piles of apples. There was the main stack of them, and she cleared out the 2 bottom corners, and had started putting apples into each. But one corner had 2 apples, while the other had a large mound of them. I didn't want to see her completely undo all of my work, and since no adult had approached her yet, I decided I would figure out what was going on. I approached her with a smile. Being an older male, I didn't want to startle her. I stayed on the other side of the apples and said, "Good morning." She looked up at me emotionless and then went right back to the apples. She would pick one up, hold it in both hands, and close her eyes. When she opened them, she would sigh again and toss the apple on the larger stack. I asked her if she was lost and where her parents were, but she didn't even acknowledge me. I was about to say something else when she finally spoke up. She asked if I worked there, and I confirmed, and then she looked back down at the apple in her hands and said, "They're all wrong." I asked her what she meant. They were a specific type of apple for that season. There was no way that they were wrong. So she tried to clarify, if that's what you want to call it. "They're rotting from the inside. Can't you smell it?" I halfway laughed because it sounded silly. But when I did, she looked up at me offended. I apologized and assured her that they were all good because they were all brand new. I then tried asking about her parents again, and she stopped me. She said that her mom had sent her to get apples for her and her brother's lunch, but that they had to be perfect. "The last ones were wrong and Thomas got sick. I will not let it happen again." Something about the way she said that made my hair stand up. What did she mean by they made him sick? I tried to confirm that he had an apple that made him sick, but she wouldn't answer, and instead berated me with more questions. She held the apple in both hands again, eyes closed, and asked if I had checked every one. I tried explaining to this child how we inspect our produce, and she said I was a liar. She held up an apple again and said that they were all rotting, and if you don't check them, you won't see what's growing in there. I know I gave her a confused look, but she didn't help the matter. She held the apple up to my face. "Things grow in the dark. Bad things. They wait until you bite down. Thomas didn't believe me either until he bit down. You should have seen his face." What the hell was this kid going on about? She sounded like a full-grown woman complaining to me about the lack of choices in apples. Why was I being berated by a child, and what made her think that these apples were rotting from the inside? I tried to ask her to explain, staying calm so I could just get a better understanding, but Then she went on about things growing in the dark while you slept. She used mushrooms as an example, saying that they grow in your lungs while you're sleeping, and that was why her dad was still in the hospital. And like an older woman saying, "I told you so," she said, "They didn't listen when I said the mushrooms were wrong." I was sufficiently creeped out and confused. Rotting from the inside, mushrooms growing in your lungs, none of it made sense. I thanked her for letting me know and told her I would tell my manager, and motioned that I would be right back. I walked away, looking back a few times to see her still sorting all the apples. I went to the back and got my manager and told him about what had just happened. He thought it was amusing, but I asked him to just come out and listen to this kid, and hopefully we could find her parents. But as I walked him to the apple display, the girl was gone. The 2 apples that had been separated were gone, but the pile of apples in the other corner still remained. I explained again to my manager that the kid claimed these apples were bad. He told me the same thing that I had said, that they just came in on the truck, and then asked me to put them back as they were and we would just move on. I agreed and started putting them back, but something was nagging at me. Why was this kid so adamant that these apples were bad? I tried holding them, seeing if maybe they had a soft spot. I even looked like a weirdo and tried smelling them like she said, but I couldn't smell anything. So I did something that I hoped I wouldn't regret. I took my box cutter that I had on me and cut into one of the apples. All over the inside, it was riddled with holes. Brown, rotting holes. What the hell? I grabbed 2, 3 more, and I cut all of them open. All of them seemed to be rotting in some way on the inside, but the outside looked entirely fine. I put all of the apples that she separated into one of the boxes that I had as well as the ones I cut open. I took them back to my manager again and showed him the ones I cut open. Whatever, I'll pay for them if I have to. He looked speechless and probably annoyed that I proved him wrong. We ended up taking that whole display of apples down. We cut the rest of the apples the kid picked out, and every single one of them was bad. How the hell would she have known? I don't know the details of it, since that's over both myself and my manager, but I do know that we basically had to return them to our supplier and explain to them what happened. I believe they told them we just had several customers return them for being bad, though. We didn't have an issue like that since, or at least no one complained, and I never saw that kid again. I'm still at a loss as to how she knew, and it kind of creeps me out. She was so adamant about it, like it was completely normal. Now, I can't even look at apples the same way, and if I ever get a craving for them, I just go with the pre-cut ones. Don't even ask me about the mushrooms. After nearly choking on one in my Alfredo, I couldn't help thinking about her comment of them growing in your lungs, and now I'm honestly just terrified of them. So, I guess, thanks, kid, for a new unfound fear of produce. I can never look at apples or mushrooms the same way again. Hey Raven, I had a story that I wanted to share from my babysitting days. I had been babysitting since I was 12, but it started out with just my siblings. When I hit 15, I started babysitting for other people, and at the time, was making decent money for it too. Being the oldest kid of 5, I was pretty used to kids and all the shenanigans they would get into, so it rarely bothered me. There was this one family that I started babysitting quite regularly. One Saturday a month, sometimes twice. Their parents had some sort of tournament on those days, and from their words, it was pretty boring, so they didn't want to take their kiddos with them. And since their mom knew my mom, she asked to have me watch them. They paid me $50, so I certainly wasn't complaining either. So I started watching them sometime after I turned 16, all the way up until I turned 18. They had 2 kids, Taylor, who was a high-energy and creative 8-year-old boy, and Beth, who was the exact opposite, quiet and shy. Both of them were very fun and sweet kids, and I always had a blast watching them. On this specific Saturday, my friend Monica was going to be staying the night with me, and I had completely forgotten about having to watch them. I asked if she could tag along, and they agreed. Monica and I were very much alike. We both babysat and had the same personalities, so there was really no concern about it either. Now we got to hang out and make some money for half the work before going back to my place for the night. I was used to these nights being longer, with their parents not getting back until 10 or 11, which really wasn't a problem for us. The kids were usually zonked by 9, so I usually got an hour or so to myself, which meant an hour for Monica and I to do whatever until they got home. Their mom, Sandy, usually had dinner prepared by the time I got there, and the kids were just sitting down to eat. Sometimes she meal prepped ahead, and we just had to heat it up. Or, occasionally, she would have pizza delivered. When Monica and I got there, the kids were already in the kitchen finishing up their dinner. I was talking to Sandy and introducing her to Monica. She let me know of a few new things going on in their home, such as to let the dogs out in the front yard because the back slider needed to be fixed. Just little reminders like that. After the rundown and telling the kids bye, they were out the door and we were left with the kids. We made ourselves a small plate for dinner and ate with them, talking about how they've been and what they wanted to do for the night. As expected, Taylor opened up to Monica immediately and gave us a play-by-play of his day, while Beth was a little quieter, but also being talkative. She seemed to really like Monica when she complimented her rabbit hair clips. Once we all finished eating, I washed the dishes while Monica took them to the living room to watch some TV for a bit. Afterwards, we would go back and forth between playing a board game and TV, depending on how distracted the kids were, or if their notorious satellite dish went out. Sometimes, it would just cut to a blue screen or static, and we had to wait for it to come back. Those were the times they seemed to really rely on me for the entertainment. We finally got through our game of apples to apples, and they said that they wanted to watch a movie. After a little disagreement between the kids, we decided to watch whatever movie was currently playing first, because it was on some TV channel, and then we could watch the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles disc that they had. I think they found an old season of the show somewhere, and Taylor was obsessed with it. Taylor found himself sprawled out on the recliner, Beth was sitting on the floor with her blanket and stuffed animal, and Monica and I were on the couch. It was always funny to me because Taylor could practically quote all the movies they had, while Beth liked to quietly sing along to any of the musical parts. It kept them fairly distracted while the two of us just talked through the night. I guess that it had been a long day because Taylor ended up falling asleep about an hour into the movie. Beth was still awake, her hands holding up her chin as she watched the show intently. We were still content with what we were doing, and in fact were pretty well distracted to the point that we didn't notice the signal starting to go out on the TV. Sometimes it starts as just freezing and jumping forward in the show. Then we might get the blue screen. But it didn't click in my head until I heard Beth's familiar little voice. She was singing quietly, but when we looked over at her, the screen was blank. Just the floating little no signal box. But Beth's singing was not what I was used to hearing. It was usually full of life, and even silly sounding. This was low, like she didn't want anyone to hear, and almost monotone. The shadows watch, they always do. Monica and I just looked at each other, confirming that we both heard that right. After confirming that I wasn't crazy, I looked back at the still blank screen and Beth, still staring at it, like she was watching something. I tried to get her attention by saying her name or asking her what she said, but she didn't respond. She didn't even react like she heard me. I grabbed the remote to turn off the TV, and as weird as it may have seemed, there was nothing on. So why would it have done anything? But for some reason, it did. And she looked back at us and asked why we turned it off, saying that she was still watching it. Her voice back to the normal, bright, and childlike way that I was used to. I asked her what she was singing, and she looked at me confused. She claimed that she was never singing, that she was watching her show and asked me to turn it back on. I stared at her for a few moments and then slowly turned the TV back on. To our relief, it had come back on and appeared to be playing normally. She smiled and thanked me and then turned back around, fixating on the show again. Monica and I just looked at each other confused for a moment and then would glance back at Beth. Part of me hoped that she would do it again, but then I was also thankful the rest of the night went on as normal as it could be, with Beth being completely oblivious to how much she had just freaked us out. After another hour or so, we got both of them to their bedrooms, giving us free reign of the living room. That's when we started talking about Beth again. We both heard her say that, but we had no idea where it came from. She'd been watching, like, some animated Barbie show. It certainly wasn't something that would have been in. We even debated on if we should tell Sandy, but decided against it. What would we even say? Hey, your daughter said something creepy while staring at a blank TV, and then she denied it. I don't know if I would have believed it myself. So, we finished our night, and when their parents came home, I told them they were great and that everything was fine. I continued to babysit them for some time, but that never happened again. I would even randomly bring it up to Beth, and she always gave me a weird look like I was crazy. But I wasn't alone that night. Monica was there, and she heard it too. So, whatever it was that night, whether Beth just heard that somewhere and wanted to sing it, or if something was trying to communicate to her through the TV, it succeeded in sufficiently creeping me out that night. I'm not sure how to classify this, but I wanted to share a story about something that happened to a friend and I at a state fair we went to last month. It was a Saturday night, and my friend Clarissa and I had made plans to go about a week prior. We loved going to festivals, but this one was one of our favorite because of a vendor that always came there that had the best elode and kettle corn. We spent the night riding the Ferris wheel, played a few games, and even enjoyed the live show. We didn't know any of the songs playing, but after a few drinks, we could really dance to anything. But this event that I'm going to tell you about kind of expanded throughout our night. As we got to the Ferris wheel, I looked over at the people from below and saw a man taking photos of the crowds. He was dressed normally, wearing jeans and a button-up shirt that was open, with nothing underneath it. He had shoulder-length hair pulled back in a hair tie and had a baseball cap on. He just seemed like a normal photographer, maybe independent, maybe trying to get some candid photos of the crowds for the festival. But what caught my attention was that the guy was using a Polaroid camera. I would expect to see someone with a digital camera with all the fancy lenses, but surprisingly, I only saw him using the Polaroid. I saw the flash go off, the Polaroid came out the front, and I watched him as he waved it and smiled at the crowd. I thought it was different, but I liked it. I liked that this guy was using something a bit more retro and seemed to be enjoying himself. No harm done. As we exited the Ferris wheel, I saw the camera guy walking towards us. He greeted us and asked if we were enjoying our time, and we said yes. Then, He asked if he could take our picture, and we agreed. The fact that he asked about the fair made me think that he probably was hired to take photos, and maybe the Polaroids were just part of a theme he was going for. He took 2 photos of us, gave us 1, and thanked us. Then he pulled out a digital camera and asked if we'd be willing to take a few more photos of us looking at the Ferris wheel, pointing at it, that sort of thing. That's really what made me think he was probably contracted. We agreed, thinking an impromptu photo shoot would be fun, and turned around to start. We at first just pointed at it and laughed because it looked silly from our side. But then it just became natural. We were pointing things out, talking, laughing. The guy then made a comment implying he was done, so we turned around to see him put away the camera and said that we did great. He got a little closer and asked us if we were models, and we said no. He complimented us, saying that we could be with how natural we seemed posing and not looking stiff. After a few seconds of that, he looked around and got even closer to us, like he didn't want anyone to hear the next part. That's when things got creepy. He said if we were interested in modeling that he could get in touch with some people and that could help us get started with our portfolios. We weren't interested in modeling. It's not like we were in the best shape anyways, so it was odd that he would approach us, of all people, but I was curious as to where he was going with this whole thing. So I took the bait. He had this grin on his face that was no longer the nice smile that he greeted us with. It was kind of gross. He said that we could make a lot of money taking some special pictures and videos, because we were the perfect shape and size. He even said that he had a studio we could go check out first too, so that way we would know he was legit. I was at a loss for words. It was completely unexpected and threw me off that I just stood there, feeling my face get hot. Clarissa was never the type to clam up, though. She immediately told him that he was gross and that we weren't interested, and that he needed to walk away before she did something she would regret. The guy just laughed and walked away, saying his offer was still good for the night. We both walked away in the opposite direction of him and just tried to cool off for a moment. We weren't about to let him ruin our night, though. So, after getting it out, we went to find our favorite vendor and enjoyed a snack before we continued on. Afterwards, we went down the lane with all the games and picked some out to play. While I was waiting for Clarissa, I was looking around and spotted the camera guy again still taking photos. But what I noticed when I looked over at him was that he was once again looking at us. I think he realized I noticed him because I saw him quickly move his camera in another direction, which kind of confirmed my suspicions. I'm not the type to try and cause conflicts, so I acted like I didn't see him and put my attention back on Clarissa. Besides, it's not like we could stop him from taking pictures in public places anyways. After a few of the booth games, we noticed that they had a small mini-golf set up, and we decided to see how good we were at it, after the few drinks that we'd had. The answer was not very good, but we were having a blast. But towards the end of the 10th hole, Clarissa got close and said quietly, "Don't look now, but I think that camera guy's following us." And I confirmed that I saw him earlier too. Normally we wouldn't think much of this, but with his creepy suggestion and him being everywhere we went, it made it feel like he was following or even stalking us. It also didn't help that every time Clarissa looked, he had the camera pointing at us, and he would quickly move like he was caught, making it obvious that his attention was on us. We did our best to ignore him and finish our game, and then immediately walked off to find something else to do to try and escape him. But no matter where we went, even when we walked through the funhouse and tried to delay there, he was around, seemingly waiting for us. I know it was just pictures, but it was weird to fixate on us, especially after what he said. Not to mention, it was pretty obvious when he showed up everywhere we went, despite the large number of people. We were honestly getting a bit annoyed and creeped out, so I suggested that we just leave. It was getting close to 11 anyways, and they started shutting down at midnight. If we left then, we could avoid the crowd of cars trying to leave at the same time. Clarissa seemed conflicted though, and wanted to confront the guy, but I talked her out of it. However, as we were heading out, we saw the guy once more, and I guess it was enough to set her off. He had just taken a picture with the Polaroid, and we both saw the flash. She immediately approached him, doing her fake smile that I knew so well, and asked the guy if he got enough. He looked at her confused, and then she said, "The pictures, asshole. How many did you take of us?" He gave a nervous laugh and said, "Oh, not many." He didn't even deny it. He just said, "Not many?" Clarissa demanded to see the pictures he took, but he refused to show us. He tried to walk away, but she kept following him, demanding the pictures of us. Apparently, there was a cop nearby that had showed up due to an unrelated event, and he heard us shouting at the guy. At this point, we had gotten the attention of some others, and another guy actually came up and took our side, demanding to see the photos too. The cop approached us and asked what was going on, and we explained what had happened. To my surprise, another woman walked up to us with a younger child and asked what was happening, and she told the cop that the camera guy had made some weird comments to her about her daughter as well. She said they just walked away and tried to avoid him after that, though. So now there were 4 of us on this guy's case. A cop standing with us, and people starting to look at us to figure out what exactly was happening. The cop tried to calm everyone down and simply asked the man to see the photos, but he still refused. He did, however, confirm that he was there to take pictures himself for his art project, and that he wasn't any type of paid work for the fair. Unfortunately, there wasn't much more the cop could really do if he refused to share the photos, so we told him that it was best to just leave, and he agreed. He started walking towards the exits, and we all watched. The man walked off, still looking just as pissed as Clarissa, but the rest of us explained more to the cop about what we had witnessed. But as we stood there with the cop, none of us noticed that the man that was trying to defend us had caught back up with the camera guy until we heard someone scream. We all looked over and saw the man on top of the camera guy just wailing on him. The cop took off and broke them, and we watched from a distance. After things calmed down, and we overheard others talking, we learned that the man caught up with the camera guy, snatched his bag that he was carrying, and looked at some of the Polaroids. They were all of females, adults, and kids alike. Some close-ups of their face, some of their back ends. If those were on the Polaroids and that close to being out in the open, who knows what pictures were on that digital camera? I guess the man lost it at that point and attacked the guy. We had to give statements since we had a complaint about the guy to begin with, and even had to explain that we didn't know who the other man was. In his words, he was just a civilian tired of seeing creeps get away with stuff. Not that I condone what he did, but he's not wrong. I'm not sure what ended up happening to either of them, to be honest, but we never heard anything more or saw anything about it. All I know is that it went from a completely normal and innocent situation to something creepy in a matter of seconds. I just hope that the camera guy learned his lesson, because the next guy may not go so easy on him. Howdy, Raven, and thanks again for this channel. Funny how this stuff can make some people feel uneasy where it makes me feel more normal. So, great to have a place to share our experiences. These stories also make my workday more enjoyable. Thank you. I wanted to share a compilation of small experiences that happened in a house we used to live in. Although they aren't terrifying, they still make you go, The first experience was my oldest daughter's experience, who was around 10 at the time. She needed me to put some polystyrene cream on a boo-boo at bedtime, so I brought the box in. I keep things in the box if they are greasy, and took the tube out. Squeezed some on her cut and put the cap back on, put it in the box, and took it with me to the bathroom to put it away in the drawer. A couple of minutes later, my daughter calls me in to tell me that she had just heard a bang on her floor, and when she looked, the polysporin box was on the floor in the middle of her room. Empty at that. How did that happen? And how was it so loud when the box was empty as well? Weird, right? The next experience was one my younger daughter, around 8 years old, had not too long after, maybe within the next week. So my oldest daughter and I were in my bedroom trying on high heels, like many young gals enjoy doing with mom's shoes, when my youngest comes in and very quietly sits on the bed and doesn't say anything. So we say hi and ask what's up. You see, this kid is normally loud and comes booming into most rooms and just blurts stuff out. She seemed off that day, though. When she started to talk, she showed me the 2 toys in her hand and said that they started moving on their own while she was playing in her room. Being the silly Billy that she is, liking to play tricks on people, I pressed a little more for details. I'm a total believer, but I just wanted to hear her out and watch her reactions. So she took me in her room, and she showed me how the car started flashing on its own, and driving back and forth on her shelf, and that the keychain basketball was spinning around in circles. She swore that it was true, but I still needed more proof. So I told her that it could be a child spirit just checking her toys out because they are neat, hoping to soothe her a little. She then began to cry, worried that the spirit might break her toys, and then she refused to sleep in her room. The reactions were very real, and I believed her at this point. To this day, she swears that it really happened. The next one happened to me probably a year later. The kids were playing in the backyard with their stuffed animals and dolls, and had gone in for a break, so left their carefully placed animals set up for whenever they returned. The only stuffed animal that was out of place a little was a stuffed dog that was laying down on its side at the altar, waiting for his bride to arrive. The whole setup, with flowers and all, was very cute. I didn't bother standing the dog up, but did notice that it was laying down while everything else was carefully placed. So I go in the house with them and begin to do some housework. But as I passed the door to go outside into the backyard, I noticed that the dog was now standing up. It was one of those things that catches the corner of your eyes, and then you need to do a double take. I knew that that dog had been laying down. I took note of it. So me being me, I had to go and explore. And did I ever feel the energy from something else standing right there, or had been there right before me? I'm one of those weirdos, a cool one, of course, that can feel and see energy. It was very apparent that someone of very high vibration had been there. I'm close with the celestial realms, so maybe. And I just had a weird happening 2 nights ago as well, but at my current house. It's a 165-year-old farmhouse with a barn, so I'm sure there are a lot of energies around here. I was outside talking on the phone at night around 9 p.m. As I was going to get into my tent, yes, I love nature so much that I sleep outdoors as long as it's possible. I started to see a whitish figure or shape that looked misty and glassy, and it started moving towards me. So I told my friend and went into the tent, but could totally feel someone there as I zipped it up. Such a creepy feeling. It was in there with me for a bit, and then I had to leave. It's not the first time I've crossed paths with entities in this house, and I'm sure it's not the last. It does make for some interesting experiences, though, that's for sure. This happened about 15 years back, when my now husband and I were in the first few years of dating. He lived at his parents' place on a 2-acre property at Camden in New South Wales, Australia. When you drove into the driveway, you were facing the front door of the main house, where his parents lived. The driveway then curved to the left, had a slight decline to a dip, and then back up slightly until you reached one of the 4 garage doors at the carport. Due to the height of the top of the driveway, at night, when a car would come in and turn to the left, the headlights would light up the garage and through the windows of the studio flat that sat above it. The studio flat was where my husband and his brother lived. It had a closed-off bathroom at the back, with an open-plan living and kitchen area. And all the windows were on the carport/driveway side of the flat. My husband and I slept in his bed at the back of the flat. Then moving towards the door/front of the flat was his brother's bed, then the couch, and then the open floor area in front of the TV, and a kitchen off to the side of that. Then there was a tiled area at the front door. Walking out of the front door, there was a main internal timber door, a screen door, and then you would step onto a piece of checker plate at the top of the external stairs, which would always make a distinctive dong hollow metal-like sound. And then that led you to a set of cement stairs that would take you down to the carport. There was a storage area under the stairs, which caused the cement steps to also have a kind of hollow sound. Because of this, it was obvious to hear when someone was walking up or down the stairs. Because it was away from the main house and parents, it was the go-to place to hang out for all of us during our 20s, which sometimes meant visitors at all hours of the night and morning. This sucked for me as I'm a very light sleeper. So if someone came over once I had gone to bed, because of the open plan living of the flats and nowhere to go to close a door except the bathroom, it meant that I was up again until they left. One Saturday night, it was my husband and I, his brother, one of his mates, and his girlfriend staying in the flat. We had a couple of drinks, but nothing too crazy, and all decided to head to bed fairly early for once. I was in the bed at the back of the flat with my husband. His brother was in his bed, and his mate and girlfriend were on a mattress in the open floor space in front of the TV. We had been asleep for a few hours when I was awakened to the sound of a car door being closed. It sounded quite loud, like it was under the carport. I thought, that's weird. I didn't see any light shine through the flat from the headlights as they drove down the top of the driveway. This is normally quite bright and fills the flat with light, waking me up. This was about 3 a.m., which wasn't unheard of happening, but was a bit of an odd hour of the night for someone to be showing up and still proceed to come up the stairs to the door, when they could see that all the lights were out, and we had clearly gone to bed. I shoved my husband to wake him up, but he was in a deep sleep and barely moved. I got out of bed and walked over to the bathroom window to look to see if I could see a car or anyone. The moon was bright enough that I could make out if there was a person or car in view, but they were most likely under the carport anyway. When I couldn't see anything, I hopped back into the bed, remaining sitting upward to listen out for anything else. Then, I heard a second car door close. Then I heard the sound of heavy feet, like someone wearing big boots, walking up the hollow cement steps, and then reaching the checker plate at the top. I heard the dong-dong as I heard the boots hit the metal plate. I then saw my husband's mate sit up in front of the TV where he was sleeping with his girlfriend. "Hey," I whispered loudly to him. "Are you hearing this?" "Yeah," he responded in an alert and confused tone. I shoved my husband again hard. As he woke up with an annoyed tone in his voice, "What?" he said to me. I responded with, "Someone is at the door." He sat straight up to see his mate sitting up also. As I said, the moon was fairly bright that night, so We could see each other's silhouettes. My husband got up and walked towards where his mate was sitting up in the lounge room. As he neared him, we heard the screen door handle jostle, like someone was pushing on it to unlatch the door. We then heard the distinct creak of the screen door hinge as it was being pulled wide open. My heart was pounding. Although it wasn't completely unusual to have a guest drop past, something about this whole situation had me creeped out. The next logical sound to come after that would have been the timber door handle turning, or, for a guest, a knock on the timber door. But the next thing we heard was the car doors closing again. Not opening, only closing. 2 doors, one after the next. Now, I was thinking, more people must be getting out of the car. How many people are here? My husband grabbed a cricket bat, and his friend grabbed another weapon. I can't remember exactly what it was. They both stood at the door and counted to 3 as they braced themselves for whoever was out there. As soon as they swung the timber door open, they found the screen door closed and latched, which was odd, as we heard it being opened but not closed. They then opened the screen door and proceeded outside to the checker plate landing at the top of the stairs, where there was no one to be seen. They ran down the stairs and both went separate ways around the flat, and then met back up on the other side. No people in sight. No cars in sight. Nothing. They came back up to tell me that there was no one out there and no cars anywhere other than our own, which were all locked. "What?" I exclaimed. I asked my husband's mate what he had heard, and he relayed to me exactly what I had experienced. Car doors shutting, heavy footsteps up the stairs, landing on the checker plate, the screen door opening, and then the car doors closing again. No sound of the door closing and no footsteps back down the stairs. Even if there was someone at the top of the stairs holding the screen door open, he would not have had time to run back down the stairs between the time we heard the screen door to when my husband and his friend opened the door to chase whoever it was. This was a flight of about 20 steps, and at its peak it was about 12 to 15 feet tall. If someone jumped off, they would have hurt themselves, or, at the very least, hit the ground hard enough to make a sound. It had me baffled, and I still think about it to this day, trying to come up with some rational explanation. I will let you know if I ever think of one. This happened when I was around 7 years old. I'm 15 as of writing this. It was my grandma's house. The day felt normal, and I was there with my 2 brothers. My grandparents' house is pretty old, but they were the only people that have been living in the house, as they were the ones that planned to build it. In that specific day, I felt calmer than normal. I've always been a calm and quiet kid. I said hi to my grandparents like normal. My little brother ran upstairs to get my grandpa's tablet before me, but I didn't care. Normally I would have been annoyed, but instead I just went to the living room. I sat on the couch and turned on the TV. My older brother sat on the other couch in the living room and was on his phone. We'd been there for a bit. You could hear a lot from the living room, like my little brother running around upstairs. Both my grandparents were up there with him, and my older brother had gotten up to go upstairs too. I was watching YouTube on the TV. I don't know why, but I started getting goosebumps on my neck, and I started feeling anxious. A little bit into the video, I accidentally turned off the TV. Then everything went quiet. It was too quiet. So I thought that my grandpa went to the 7-Eleven nearby with my brothers. As I turned the TV back on, 2 big white gloves slowly moved into my peripheral vision. I've never reacted so quickly in my life. I quickly stood up and turned around. I backed up from the couch, The gloves looked like the classic cartoon white gloves. I ran through the kitchen and up the stairs. The most unsettling thing was when I looked away from the couch and ran. As I ran through the kitchen, I got chills and goosebumps on my neck again. It felt like something was behind me. Going up the stairs, I instinctively turned around, and I saw a white glove quickly move back around the corner. Honestly, I was on the brink of tears. I got up the stairs and saw everyone was up there minding their own business. My older brother had experiences with paranormal things, so I went to him and asked him to come downstairs with me. I don't know what made me want to go back downstairs, but going back down there, behind my brother, we walked through the kitchen and into the living room. We didn't see anything, so we started going back upstairs. I was going to check behind the couch, but I don't know if it was instinct or paranoia. Instead of checking, I just followed my brother looking back to make sure whatever it was didn't follow me again. I told my brother all about it, and he listened, seemingly understanding, but I'm not sure if he believed me. This was just a boring Friday night. All my brothers and sisters seemed to have somewhere to go or something to do. My parents had to help a friend with something, so it was just me, myself, and I. I wasn't too upset about it. I could always find something to entertain my tween mind, but I was under strict orders to not leave the house under any circumstances. Which, as you all will find out, I didn't listen. Anyway, I sat there thinking about the creek behind our apartments. All the teens went down there to smoke, make out, listen to music, and everything else teenagers do. Because I was still young, I couldn't go without a friend or sibling, but tonight I vowed to be a big girl and go hang with all the other kids. I would be back in time, I told myself. Little did I know I was making a huge mistake. I was about to learn my parents had certain rules, and that people aren't always as they seem. So, I grabbed my boombox, yes, I'm showing my age a little bit, and headed down the small path through the trees, and straight to the creek bank. Music blaring, wind in my hair, but then I called out to everyone, and I knew that something wasn't right. I turned down the music and stood very still. The air, usually cool and crisp this time of year, was thick and smelled metallic. What? I thought. It's Friday. Where is everybody? Then I heard it. A disturbing crying sound. It sounded like a cross between a woman singing and sobbing. It chilled me to the bone. I edged closer to the creek and then heard it again. It kind of sounded like it was coming from beneath the water. I took off my shoes and waded in up to my knees, and it got louder. Kelly, Lisa, Dave, Melissa, Howie, Renee? I called out, hoping that some of them were just playing a joke on me. No answer. Oh God, I thought, what is this? And then I saw it. A bright light in front of me which glowed a bright blue. A motor kicked on, and then I felt something hot crashed into my leg. It didn't knock me over, but I did stumble quite a bit, and then the crying sound became a wail. I reached down to my leg and grabbed onto the thing that hit me. It was a light fixture, lit up with a small fan-like structure attached to his base. As soon as I lifted out of the water, I heard a robotic male voice say, "Don't touch us, little girl. We will electrocute you, and then we will have no choice but to leave you here. You should have stayed your disobedient self at home like your daddy told you to. We know everything that goes on here, and your friends, well, some of them might not exactly live here. You see, you don't know anything. So unless you're ready to meet your demise, I suggest you let go of me, turn around, and head home. And no, she isn't hurting. She's one of us. And no, we're not aliens and not demons, and we're not robots. If you get a top clearance, you'll find out who and what we are. Now, for the last time, get your hands off of me. It yelled. Not before I heard it hum and felt some strong vibrations. I just threw him, or it, away and started running. I snatched my boombox on my way and never looked back. But I was suddenly stopped by, I guess, another one. I felt the harsh smack on the side of my head, saw the bright orange light, and heard an even more disturbing voice say, "You should have stayed home. Tell, and I will kill you." Slowly and painfully. "It's a shame you didn't get to meet the one you were investigating. She has a blade." It hissed, clicked, and started wailing right in my ears. I was almost disoriented by the sound, but I kept running. I didn't relax until I was safely inside the apartment, with the door locked. I didn't even realize I was crying. I checked my leg and face. No bruises or burns, but what the hell was that? I grabbed the phone and started calling neighbors, but the things were right. Some of those kids didn't live there. Some of the moms just chalked it up to the neighbor kids bringing friends home from school, but when I told one of them where I had been tonight, she immediately got silent. I kept saying hello until she finally said, "I'm sending Kelly over. You don't need to be alone." She was over almost as soon as I hung up. She just hugged me and said, "Yeah, I know what you saw, but I don't know what it is." We sat there waiting, praying that someone would come home and explain everything. I didn't care about getting in trouble. I was just afraid and curious. My brother came home first. He was mad at me, but he never ratted me out. He just told me that the government had done some projects and training back there, and some of those kids were young recruits. Every second Friday, third Monday, first Saturday, and fourth Wednesday were testing days. But most of the time it was just teenagers hanging out. He said that my dad wanted me to know nothing of this, because I already have a vivid imagination. Still do to this day. No one knows exactly what those things are, but whatever, who, or what they are, they're extremely dangerous. I've done some extensive research to try and figure out what I tangled with that night, and I've only found one thing where a girl said she dreamed about seeing something like this outside of her house. But that's still nothing really. Can anyone tell me what that was? Should I just forget that I saw it? Should I have even written this story? I don't know. All I know is this. Sometimes it's best to just chill out and take people's advice. I'm still curious, but I always proceed with caution. You should too. To answer your questions, no, I never got a top clearance. I had to be bribed to ever go near that creek again, but did eventually go back with my brothers. But never ever on those days. And even in the heat of July, I just sat there while everyone else got in. I still enjoyed hanging out with everyone though, but I didn't look at them all the same. We only stayed there for 2 more years after that, but none of us will ever forget that strange little apartment building with the creek in the back. Hey Raven, this is a short-ish story about something that happened to me and my girlfriend a few weeks back. More my girlfriend, though. I'm not the best storyteller, and this isn't comparable to some scary situations, but it stuck with me. I'm 21 from the UK, and I live in a, well, sort of nice-ish area, with kids who run about wearing balaclavas and thinking they're Pablo Escobar, doing God knows what to piss people off. I can't judge, as I wasn't the best kid, and was always up to mischief, but not like the kids these days. So, my story starts as me and my girlfriend were just chilling at home, and we decided, hey, we haven't seen our friends in a little while. Why don't we both go see them now, as they were asking, so we agreed. And I left with her, and she got in the car to pick up her friend, I walked around the corner to see my friend also. Less than a 2-minute walk. So I arrive at my friend's house, we catch up. About 15 minutes goes by and my friend asks me if I wanted to smoke with him. I say yeah, and he gets to it. My phone died as he did this, but I thought, it's okay, I'll just charge it in a second. Soon as this happens, my girlfriend, who is halfway through pregnancy, calls my friend through Instagram. He answers it, and instantly I'm hit with static like glitching audio, and all I hear is, "Help, come quick, lads in the park with knives." My heart sank, as she is pregnant with our soon-to-be daughter. I panicked and I didn't know what to do. But in an instant, I just grabbed the biggest kitchen knife out of his drawer and put it down my pants. And I know what you're thinking. Soon-to-be dad, smoking and carrying knives. Let's not go there. I'm a very nice person who likes to unwind from time to time. Nothing crazy and no partying or drinking, just a chill sesh in a secure, safe environment. Anyways, as I'm running to the park, which is about 5 minutes away from where I am, I noticed my girl's car parked outside of our house. She had left and drove home. So I met her at the window with her friends in the car, and they all looked shaken up and white like ghosts. I asked what's going on, and they told me that there were a few lads waiting behind her car for around 10 minutes, while her friend was getting ready to come down and meet them. She said the lads were acting shady, and that they were only a few meters away. They kept looking and pointing towards the car. She locked the door and waited for her friend. They then went to her driver's side and banged on the window, saying, "Hey, can you help me?" To which she responded, "What's going on?" "There was a man in the park with the machete, and he held us up and asked where we were from and what we had on us." My girl told them that she would ring to come and help, and they insisted no, they shouldn't ring me and wanted them to stay with them. She rang me regardless, and that's when they were acting all weird, saying, "Oh, it's okay, look, there's my mom over there coming to get me." But no one was there, though. Weird, right? So, as I've been told the situation as I'm at the car window, I see two lads walk around the corner towards the car, and both of them had balaclavas on in black. Her friend says from the back seat, "That's them." I took my hood down, showed my face, and shouted "yo" at the lads. They came to an immediate stop and put their hands up for some reason. I got angry and went in on them, telling them to basically F off from around the area, and told them that my girl was pregnant, and that they had scared her. I then shouted out, "You effing about with knives, eh?" And as I said that, I showed the handle of the knife that I had tucked into my waist. They immediately fled and started running from me. Now, all the girls are a bit shaken up, and I'm getting called an idiot for doing what I did, but was thanked. But I didn't have to do what I did. I agreed. We dropped her friends back off, and we were circling around the area to get to the two different houses of her friends. We saw the two same lads walking about, and they were ducking behind cars, probably thinking we were looking for them. They saw us drop off one of her friends at her house, and then they knocked on her friend's door. They told her that they didn't want any issues with me, and for nothing to happen to them, and that it was all just a big prank. I mean, come on. Doing that sort of stuff when you know it's a car full of girls, that's not funny. And I knew deep down it was bigger than that. What if she didn't ring me to come? Why didn't they want me there? Why did they want them to come help them with something if it was just a prank? What was the motive? What would have happened to them if they had gotten out, and what if they actually had the knives? I mean, they had the balaclavas, after all. I'm glad that I did what I did, and glad that my girl and her friends are okay, because they could have been trying to rob them, or even worse, actually just hurting one of them, including my unborn daughter. Thank you, Raven. I love your work and listen to your stories at work all day long, 8 hours a day. Sorry this ended up being long and not that interesting, but it stuck with me, and it's all about the what-ifs. What if they hurt my girl and my daughter was harmed? I couldn't have lived with myself if I didn't react as quick as possible, and I'm glad that my girl knew better than to leave the car. Hey Raven, I hope you are doing well. So, I have a scary story for you. Back in April, I was taking a nap in my dorm room, and I woke up from my nap, but as it turns out, I must have still been dreaming, 'cause I saw ghostly students and staff that I met before, but they were out of place, dressed like World War II soldiers with bloody uniforms, and the staff of nurses and one student walked by. And I said, "You all aren't supposed to be in my room. What are you doing in my room?" One soldier and a nurse turned around to stare at me blindly for a minute that felt like forever, and then they turned back around to walk through my mirror and disappeared. Now, keep in mind this was a military hospital during the World War II era in Fisherville, Virginia. My campus is called Woodrow Wilson Workforce Center. I actually have a part 2 to this. So I was taking a nap once again, several months later, and I heard the door to my dorm, my closet, and my bathroom all shake loudly. I got up in a panic, and then I heard footsteps outside of my room into the suite. I walked closer to my closet, and I then heard a deep male voice say, "Shut up and get out." Then I opened my door, and no one was in the hall. So I shut my door and locked it. Fast forward to now, I actually have a new dorm room in a modern, newer dorm area, and I haven't witnessed any more hauntings since. Hey, so every season one of my neighboring towns has a fair that takes over the main street. The road is then blocked for the duration. There's a summer one, a winter, an autumn, and also spring fair. Each have their own specialties and themes. My friends and I go to them every year to pass the time. One year it was especially dull with few things of interest, and we were preparing to leave to go find something else to do. I noticed my friend, let's call her Gabby, was talking to a rather hippie-looking couple. I didn't say anything because she's quite the social butterfly and loves meeting new people. Katie, my other friend, and I were spending some time together at one of the stalls browsing. It was mainly random items at food stores and local produce that was brought in. I live in an area that borders the rural areas and also has a pretty large migrant community, so there's always plenty of variety. Once we were done, we grabbed some food and saw Gabby still talking to that couple. Except this time she was joined by other hippie-looking people. I don't judge how people choose to dress, I just want to make that clear, but that's the best way that I can describe how they were dressed. We walked over to say hi, and we were greeted with extremely happy, over-the-top greetings. I instantly felt uncomfortable by it, but neither of my friends did. They told us about their community where they liked to sing songs, and they told us they had a cafe in the Blue Mountains, and that we would be welcome to come. They said that we would be going home. I really don't like that kind of talk. They gave us some cookies, I chose not to eat mine just to be safe, and pamphlets about their organization. Most of it was religious dribble about suffering and how to make the world a better place. I politely said no thank you, but my other friends read it, and so I got the chance to look afterwards. After I spoke with them, we gave each other the signal that it was time to leave, and most of them said goodbye and that they hoped to see us soon. We giggled and walked to Katie's car when we noticed one of them following us. Gabby and I were creeped out, while Katie thought it was nice. So she turned around and started speaking to her, thanking them for being so nice. This cult member asked for our emails, and I said I didn't have one. I know it's dumb, but still. Katie hesitated while Gabby willingly gave over her real email address. I bring this up because it's important for later on. We got into her car. The lady with that creepy damn smile on her face pressed her face against the window, telling us that she was so excited to meet us and wanted to see us soon. We laughed about it on the way home, and we joked about how awkward it would be seeing them the year after. Our group chat got a screenshot of an email that she had received from the place, and we laughed about it. She said that she replied and said thanks but no thanks, paraphrasing her. Hers was much more long-winded, but you get the idea. She kept receiving emails from that account. Eventually, we recommended to her that she blocked them, and she did. But that didn't stop them from emailing her from other accounts. Each one she blocked only for them to contact her from another email. They would contact her anywhere that email was associated with, stating how concerned they were for her and that she was always welcome with them. It also meant they were able to find her through Facebook, and thus her real-life name and where she worked. They contacted her there, too. For months, it was a complete mess. And then, out of the blue, they just left her alone. Gabby didn't want to go to any of the fairs after that, in case it started up again. The next time we went was, I think, a year or so later. Now, I'm not going to name the cult or the establishment, as it is known what they are, but their cafe is still open as far as I'm aware, and apparently the food is supposed to be really good, too. We didn't see them the last time or any other time we've been there. Not sure why. I don't know if they've been banned or something. I also want to say that I've been watching your channel for a while now, Raven, and I really love your accent. Thanks, I think. When I was about 13 years old, I had a weird dream. In the dream, I was in a strange house. Everything was hazy and brownish, like a dark space with wood paneling. I was walking from room to room. Each room's detail was hazy and indistinct. It also felt like I was looking through someone else's eyes. It was so weird to me. As I walked through the room, I would see various strange people. In one room, there was a wolf man in a long coat, like a peacoat, just standing there holding a bag. In another, there were two little, well, I don't know what to call them, just monstrous little figures. These two were laughing and giggling. They ran up to me and said something. Whoever I was looking through threw their head back and a distorted laugh came out. It was deep and slow. I think the Freddy Fazbear kind of chuckle. In the next room, there was a soldier of some type. He was bundled up in cold weather gear, complete with a face mask. He was checking his gear in the mirror. He looked over at me and said something, and I responded. I have no idea what was said, but I shook my head no and moved on. In the last room, there was a medical table-like thing, and on it was a Frankenstein-like monster. At the head end of the table was a doctor who was working on the monster. This was where the dream ended. That morning, I woke up and told both my mom and sister about the weird dream. We all tried to figure it out, but that came to nothing. We had a habit of trying to figure out what influenced our dreams. Like, what events could cause the strange imagery. The only conclusion we could come to was that we might be moving again and somehow this was a stress dream from that. Well, weeks later, it was Halloween. My parents and sister had left to go on a trip to where my dad was looking at getting a new job, Detroit, Oregon, if I remember right. I stayed with my buddy, because it might be the last Halloween we got to spend together. In fact, this was an event. His parents had an RV that was hooked up to power, and not just me, but all of our friends were staying the night. That night, about an hour before we were going out, was when the dream became real. I was walking through the house. My costume was a modern take on the Grim Reaper. I had a skull mask that came in two parts that was glued to my face. You just used black makeup on the parts it didn't cover. It was an easy costume. A black hoodie and skeleton gloves for the look. And I had a practice kama to complete the costume. A kama is a small scythe-like weapon from Asia. Mine was wood, not metal. To add to the costume, I had put small yellow-orange LEDs by the eye holes, and it made my eyes light up. I could still see, but it was blurry and hazy. My buddy C was going as the classic Wolfman. We lived in northern Nevada, and it was cold on Halloween. We even had snow before on Halloween. That was why he was also in a long coat. My buddy A had two little twin brothers. They were made up as little deformed monsters. For some reason, we named the two monsters Eeg and Gore, like Igor but split into two parts. They made a joke about bringing me plenty of people that night, and I laughed. My buddy A was in the next room dressing up as a cold weather soldier. The snow pants, ski mask, the whole thing. Finally, my buddy E was lying on the kitchen table while A's dad finished putting the makeup on to make him look like Frankenstein. If you're wondering about why he was lying down, well, if you've ever tried to put makeup on a person while standing, it can be done. However, roll a towel, putting it under the neck and having them lay down on a table to put the makeup on also helps with the lighting. This was in the days before ring lights and chairs that would tilt back properly were affordable. So my dream seemed to be a prophetic one. The last time my friends and I ever got together like that. This was all the way back in the early 90s. I think we moved up to Centralia, Washington sometime after the new year. The Oregon job wasn't something my dad wanted, but he did find one in Washington. Anyway, we had a great night trick-or-treating, even playing poker with the candy. Don't worry, whoever won. We just split it evenly with everyone at the end. That way we all got the same amount of candy and got to have fun with it. I hope you like this story. It's a memory that comes back around Halloween every year. Hey Raven. Hopefully my story will serve as a fitting addition to the impressive collection thus far. I listen to these stories very often now, but this will be my first submission. I love your channel and keep up the great work. Thank you. My anecdote requires a bit of exposition, so bear with me, if you please. Back in the early 2000s, my dear maternal grandmother passed away quietly in her home. Since I can remember, my family and I had lived across the street from her. It was a treat for the entire family, really. Grandma could sneak across the street to pilfer garden-grown vegetables from us. My parents could send us to her place, whenever, practically, and we kids really loved her quite a lot. She was a brusque, fiery woman, but she knew how to love us, too, stern as she could be. When I was about 10, my mother suddenly went over to Grandma's house one morning to check in on her. I remember my mom looked a little panicked. She and Grandma used to speak on the phone every morning first thing. This morning, however, my mom did not get a call. I remember trying to go into Grandma's house after my mother. I remember just blindly following her because I could feel it in my bones that something was wrong. I could hear her screaming and sobbing from outside. She yelled at me to not enter the house, whatever I did. I'm not sure what I did next, really, but I remember being in quite a shock, and pretty frightened. I think I just stood there and waited, if memory serves. Following the loss, my mother was hurting in a pretty bad way. I feel like anyone would be if you had your mom so close all the time, and suddenly found her gone. It's a tough thing. In the months following Grandma's passing, a couple of interesting incidents took place. One foggy morning a few weeks after the funeral, My mom abruptly left our house while making breakfast in the kitchen. She looked absolutely entranced by something outside. I was too small to see out the kitchen window above the sink, but I did scoot over to the door and followed my mom out, curious as to where she was going in such a hurried way. I followed her up the block a bit, into the middle of the street where she was standing still now, pointing ahead of her into the fog of the morning and saying, "Mom?" I looked on and didn't see anything or anyone in the road. "Mom, is that you?" my mother yelled. She was crying now. I still didn't see anyone or anything, but my mom did eventually turn around. She noticed me standing there in a state of childlike awe and confusion, and told me that she was 100% certain she had just seen her mother wandering slowly about the street. She even recognized the outfit Grandma had on: pale green linen shorts and a long denim tunic top with a pink butterfly embroidered on the front. The final occurrence happened when my parents began settling Grandma's affairs. Eventually, an estate sale was held at my grandma's house, and before it took place, my mom let my siblings and I look around and pick out anything of Grandma's that we wanted to keep to remember her by. We started off in the kitchen, and my mom exclaimed. She pointed to the large bay window in the center of the room. Grandma always had beautiful crystal figures hanging in that window. When I looked up at it, I saw one butterfly crystal dancing and spinning wildly. It looked like it was being blown about by a terrible wind. Its movement was casting all kinds of beautiful rays of rainbows all around the room. It really was a sight, especially since the air in that room was otherwise completely still. There was no breeze to make that thing fling about the way that it was. I noticed my mom watching the spectacle with a smile, like she knew a secret that none of us were privy to. Finally, we had finished our last tour of Grandma's house without any other events. We made our way back through the kitchen and into the entryway, each of us with hands full of different treasures that would help us keep Grandma in close remembrance. I remember feeling so sad in that moment. Right when we opened the front door, music began to play. "Mom?" my mother softly asked. She splayed her arm in front of us kids protectively and gestured for us to stay put. I watched her make her way back into the kitchen. She leaned onto the kitchen table and smirked. We watched her too from the doorway. She was smiling at a handcrafted jewelry box that sat atop the table. One of those old-school ones that plays the dainty classical music. It was a nostalgic sound, even then. My mom said finally, "I knew it was you, Mom," and smiled once more at the box. Alright kids, back to our place. I remember then we all went home. I remember feeling a little better after that, seeing my mom smile like that. And I remember wondering, was that really you, Grandma?